The waves crashed against the desolate beach, their rhythmic roar swallowed by the vast emptiness of the night. A sleek, elegant yacht bobbed gently in the dark water, its lights a faint glow against the endless horizon. The tranquility of the scene was shattered by a frantic, high-pitched voice crackling through an emergency line. "Help! There's been a murder," the woman screamed, her words cutting through the static like shards of glass. "On the yacht, please, send someone." The line went dead. Detective Isabella Izzy Diaz stood on the shore, her sharp eyes fixed on the vessel. The cold wind whipped her dark hair around her face, but she paid it no mind. She had seen her share of crime scenes, but something about this one unsettled her, a nagging feeling she couldn't ignore. Her expression remained cold, calculating, as she tightened her coat and began to walk toward the dock. Flashing her badge at the officers stationed there, she boarded the yacht. The interior was a study in luxury, but the chaos told a different story. Expensive furniture had been overturned, shattered glass crunched beneath her boots, and the faint smell of liquor mixed with salt water lingered in the air. She moved deeper into the heart of the yacht, her senses on high alert. In a lavishly decorated cabin, she found the victim, an elegant older woman, her lifeless body sprawled across the floor. Her name was Eleanor Graves, a renowned art collector known for her vast wealth and influential connections. Izzy's eyes immediately noted the peculiar mark on the victim's wrist, resembling a burn, and the absence of the extravagant diamond necklace Eleanor was known to wear. Standing nearby was Marcus Hayes, the victim's younger lover. His good looks were marred by an air of forced grief that didn't sit well with Izzy. His hands trembled as he recounted his version of events. "She slipped and fell," he said, his voice shaky but oddly rehearsed. "It all happened so fast. I tried to help her, but it was too late." Izzy steadied him, her gaze piercing through his facade. His tearless eyes and the inconsistencies in his account were enough to plant the first seeds of doubt. Izzy crouched beside the victim, her gloved hands carefully examining the body. The burn mark on Eleanor's wrist intrigued her, it was too deliberate to be accidental. Her trained eye noted subtle details, the angle of the body, the faint smudges on the floor that suggested a struggle. The scene was chaotic, but not in the way she would expect from an accidental fall. It was too perfect, as if someone had gone to great lengths to stage it. She turned back to Marcus, her voice sharp. "How exactly did she fall? Where were you when it happened?" Marcus stammered, his answers growing less convincing with each question. Izzy's gut told her he was hiding something. She ordered the yacht to be locked down, preventing anyone from coming or going. One by one, she interviewed the yacht staff. The crew painted a picture of a tumultuous relationship between Marcus and Eleanor. They had argued frequently, but none of the arguments had seemed out of the ordinary until now. A steward mentioned overhearing Marcus on the phone earlier in the week, his voice tense as he spoke about debts. Another crew member added that Marcus had been drinking heavily that night. Izzy's instincts told her this wasn't a simple case of domestic violence gone wrong. There were other forces at play. Back at the precinct, Izzy ordered a full background check on both Marcus and Eleanor, along with a trace on the burner phone used to make the emergency call. She also had the tech team process the crime scene for anything they might have missed. As she reviewed her notes, her mind returned to the burn mark on Eleanor's wrist and the missing necklace. Something about the mark tugged at a memory, an article she'd read about a local criminal family, the Costellos, known for their involvement in extortion and art theft. Was it possible this wasn't just a crime of passion, but something far more calculated? The background checks provided further clarity. Eleanor Graves had no shortage of enemies. Her dealings in the art world had earned her a long list of rivals, and her two ex-husbands weren't exactly fans either. Despite her social connections, Eleanor's finances were heavily guarded, with rumors of offshore accounts and hidden assets. Marcus, on the other hand, was a walking red flag. His past was littered with failed businesses, gambling debts, and a string of broken relationships. The burner phone trace led nowhere, but the untraceable nature of the call only deepened Izzy's suspicions. Whoever was behind this had planned it meticulously. Izzy decided to confront Marcus again, this time armed with the new information. She found him in the precinct's holding room, his demeanor more composed than before. "Let's talk about your debts," she began, her tone calm but firm. Marcus feigned ignorance, claiming Eleanor had been generous and had helped him out financially. "It wasn't like that," he insisted. "We loved each other. It wasn't about money. Izzy wasn't buying it." She noticed a small cut on Marcus's hand, something he hadn't mentioned before. When she asked about it, he hesitated before offering a weak explanation about moving luggage. His tone was unconvincing, and Izzy's suspicions deepened. The missing necklace became the next point of contention. When Izzy brought it up, Marcus's reaction was telling. He acted surprised, claiming he hadn't noticed it was gone. But the more he spoke, the more Izzy was convinced he was lying. She ordered the lab to test the blood found near the cut on Marcus's hand, as well as any other trace evidence from the scene. The lab results came back quickly, revealing traces of a chemical in Marcus's blood that matched the burn mark on Eleanor's wrist. The chemical was known to cause burns on contact, and its presence in both Marcus's wound and Eleanor's injury was no coincidence. Izzy's mind raced as she connected the dots. The Costellos' name resurfaced in her thoughts. Their reputation for leaving a signature mark, often a burn resembling a snake, on their victims fit the evidence. She needed to dig deeper into their connections. The Costellos weren't just any criminal family, they were notorious for their ruthless tactics and their penchant for art theft. Izzy's investigation revealed a chilling detail: their calling card, a snake burn, was often tied to their more personal vendettas. The missing necklace and the burn mark were starting to form a coherent picture. Izzy decided it was time to confront the Costellos directly. Their base of operations was rumored to be a rundown warehouse on the edge of the city. Arriving at the warehouse, Izzy contacted local law enforcement, requesting backup. She knew better than to go in alone. The Costellos weren't the kind of people you confronted without a plan. As the SWAT team arrived, Izzy briefed them on what to expect. She wasn't sure how many people were inside or what they would find, but she was certain it wouldn't be anything good. The raid on the warehouse was swift and efficient. Most of the building was empty, but in a hidden room, the team discovered a trove of stolen artwork, including Eleanor Graves' missing necklace. Izzy's heart raced as she uncovered a photograph among the items, showing Marcus in conversation with none other than the head of the Costello family. The connection was undeniable. Back at the precinct, Izzy pieced together the final details of the case. Marcus had been working with the Costellos all along, using his relationship with Eleanor to gain access to her wealth and connections. The plan had been to rob her, but something had gone wrong, and it had ended in murder. Izzy's next move was clear: she needed to set a trap for Marcus. She arranged a meeting with him at the police station, presenting it as a routine follow-up. Marcus arrived, his confidence barely masking his growing unease. Izzy confronted him with the photograph, watching as his composure cracked. He denied everything at first, but as she pressed him, the truth began to spill out. The confession came in pieces, each one more damning than the last. Marcus admitted to working with the Costellos, to planning the robbery, and to being present the night Eleanor died. He claimed it had never been his intention to kill her, but his words rang hollow. Izzy could see through the lies, through the attempts to paint himself as a victim of circumstance. The final nail in the coffin came when Marcus revealed the truth behind the burn mark. It had been his idea to use the chemical, a twisted homage to the Costello's signature. In his arrogance, he had thought it would make the crime untraceable. Instead, it had led Izzy straight to him. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, Izzy felt a momentary sense of satisfaction. The case was closed, and Eleanor Graves would have justice. But as she returned to her desk and reviewed the case file one last time, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the tip of the iceberg. The Costellos were still out there, and their reach was far greater than she had anticipated. Her phone buzzed with a new case, a fresh mystery to unravel. Izzy sighed, grabbed her coat, and prepared to dive back into the darkness. The city never slept, and neither could she. Detective Isabella Diaz leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling of her office. The buzz of the precinct surrounded her, phones ringing, officers talking, the hum of printers churning out reports. But Izzy's mind was elsewhere, replaying every detail of the investigation she'd just closed. The case had taken her to the edge, and while Marcus was behind bars and justice had been served for Eleanor Graves, the lingering threads of the Costello family's involvement gnawed at her. The photograph of Marcus with the Costello patriarch was proof of a larger game, one she'd only begun to understand. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. Another murder, another trail of chaos. But this time, the name of the victim stopped her cold. Elena Vargas. Izzy's stomach dropped. Elena had been a friend, a journalist with a sharp mind and an unyielding resolve to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The two had worked together on a handful of cases, and Izzy had always admired Elena's courage, though it often bordered on reckless. Now, she was gone. The thought hit her like a gut punch. "Detective Diaz," a voice called from across the room. It was Lieutenant Parker, her superior. His expression was grim, his usual gruffness softened by what Izzy assumed was an attempt at sympathy. "I need you on this one. I know you and Vargas work together. This is going to hit close to home, but you're the best we've got." Izzy nodded, standing and grabbing her coat. "What do we know so far?" she asked, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she slid them into her pockets. Parker handed her a file. She was found in her apartment. No forced entry, no obvious signs of struggle. But the scene, it's strange. "You'll see for yourself." Izzy clenched her jaw and headed for the crime scene. The drive through the city passed in a blur, her thoughts consumed by questions. Who would want Elena dead? What had she been working on? And, more importantly, why had she let her guard down? When Izzy arrived at the apartment, the scene was already cordoned off, yellow tape fluttering in the evening breeze. She flashed her badge to the officer on duty and stepped inside. The air was heavy, the faint smell of something metallic lingering, a smell Izzy knew all too well. Elena's body lay in the center of the living room, sprawled out on a Persian rug that was now stained with blood. Her hands were positioned oddly, palms up, as if she'd been reaching for something or offering something to her killer. Her eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. On the coffee table beside her was a single playing card, the Queen of Hearts. Izzy crouched beside the body, her mind racing. The scene was eerily meticulous, almost theatrical. She examined Elena's hands and noticed faint bruising around her wrists, as if she had been restrained at some point. But there were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. Whoever had done this had been careful, calculated. Her gaze shifted to the playing card. It was pristine, the edges crisp as if it had just been pulled from a new deck. She placed it in an evidence bag, her gut telling her it was significant. This wasn't just a murder, it was a message. "Detective," a voice said behind her. It was one of the forensic techs. "We found something in her office. You're going to want to see this." Izzy followed the tech to a small room down the hall. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and the desk was cluttered with papers, notebooks, and a laptop. But what caught Izzy's attention was the corkboard on the wall, covered in photographs, maps, and strings connecting various points. At the center of it all was a name, Costello. "Elena, what were you digging into?" Izzy murmured, stepping closer. She scanned the board, her eyes darting from one piece of evidence to the next. There were photographs of the Costello family, newspaper clippings about art thefts and mysterious disappearances, and handwritten notes in Elena's sharp script. One note stood out, "The Queen is the key." Izzy's blood ran cold. The Queen of Hearts. The card left at the crime scene wasn't random, it was connected to whatever Elena had uncovered. Izzy's mind raced as she pieced together what she could. Elena had been investigating the Costellos, and she'd gotten too close. But why the theatrics? Why the playing card? Was it a taunt? A signature? Izzy turned to the tech. "Bag everything." I want every piece of paper, every file, every photograph. And get her laptop to the lab. I need to know what she was working on. As the techs began collecting evidence, Izzy stepped back into the living room. She stared at Elena's body, a wave of guilt washing over her. She should have been there. She should have known Elena was in danger. But there was no time for self-recrimination. Whoever had done this was still out there, and they wouldn't stop with Elena. Back at the precinct, Izzy spread out the evidence on her desk. The photographs, the notes, the playing card, they all pointed to something bigger than a simple murder. Elena had stumbled onto something the Costellos didn't want coming to light. Izzy's eyes landed on a photograph of Vincent Costello, the youngest member of the family and a known enforcer. He had a reputation for being ruthless, but also for being meticulous. If anyone was behind the theatrics of Elena's murder, it was him. Izzy pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Diaz. It's been a while. Agent Keller, Izzy said, her tone brisk. I need your help. It's about the Costellos. There was a pause on the other end. That's a dangerous name to be throwing around. I know, Izzy replied. But they just killed someone close to me. And I'm not letting them get away with it. Keller sighed. All right. Meet me at the usual spot in an hour. And bring everything you've got. Izzy hung up and grabbed the files, her mind racing. Keller was an FBI agent who had worked organized crime for years. If anyone had intel on the Costellos, it was him. But working with Keller was always a gamble. He played by his own rules, and his methods often skirted the line of legality. Still, Izzy was willing to take the risk. The coffee shop where they met was quiet, the kind of place where people minded their own business. Keller was already there, a cup of black coffee in front of him. He looked older than Izzy remembered, his salt and pepper hair now mostly gray, but his sharp eyes hadn't lost their edge. Diaz, he said, motioning for her to sit. What have you gotten yourself into this time? Izzy slid the files across the table. Elena Vargas. She was investigating the Costellos. She found something big. And they killed her for it. Keller opened the file, his eyes scanning the contents. He paused when he reached the photograph of the Queen of Hearts. A calling card, he muttered. This is Vincent's work. He uses these cards to mark his kills. It's his way of sending a message. What kind of message? Izzy asked. Keller leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. That he's untouchable. That anyone who crosses the Costellos will pay the price. Izzy's jaw tightened. Not this time. I'm going after him. Keller raised an eyebrow. You're going after Vincent Costello? Do you have a death wish? I don't have a choice, Izzy said, her voice firm. Elena deserves justice. And if Vincent thinks he's untouchable, it's time someone proved him wrong. Keller studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. But if you're going to do this, you're going to need more than just guts. You're going to need a plan. And you're going to need backup. Izzy's lips curved into a grim smile. Good thing I've got you, then. Keller chuckled softly. You always did know how to drag me into trouble. As they began to strategize, Izzy felt the fire inside her reignite. The Costellos had made this personal. And she wasn't going to stop until every last one of them paid for what they'd done. Izzy and Keller spent the next hour poring over the evidence, piecing together what they could from Elena's investigation. The corkboard from her apartment had been a goldmine of connections, but it was still incomplete. Elena had clearly been onto something big, but the final piece of the puzzle remained elusive. The Queen is the key, Izzy murmured, tapping the note Elena had written. Her mind kept returning to that phrase, trying to decipher its meaning. It has to mean more than just a playing card. She wouldn't write something so cryptic unless it was important. Keller sipped his coffee, his sharp eyes scanning the photographs. Vincent Costello doesn't just kill for sport. He's a tactician. If this card is his calling card, there's a reason he left it behind. He wanted you, or someone, to see it. The queen might not just be a metaphor, it could be a person. Izzy's brow furrowed as the thought sank in. A person. Or a position, she said. If Vincent's using the card as a symbol, maybe it represents someone in their organization. Someone high up. A woman. Keller leaned forward, his voice lowering. That's not a bad theory. The Costellos have always been a family business, but there's been a lot of chatter about someone new stepping in behind the scenes. A woman. Some say she's Vincent's confidant, others claim she's pulling the strings entirely. Izzy's mind raced. If that's true, then Elena might have uncovered her identity. That would explain why she was killed. Vincent wouldn't leave loose ends if someone that powerful was at risk of being exposed. Keller nodded. We need to figure out who this queen is. If we can identify her, we can dismantle the entire operation. They agreed to split tasks. Keller would reach out to his FBI contacts to dig deeper into the Costellos' recent activities, while Izzy would focus on combing through Elena's files for any overlooked details. Time was of the essence. Whoever the queen was, she wouldn't sit idle knowing Elena's investigation was now in Izzy's hands. Back at the precinct, Izzy locked herself in the evidence room and spread Elena's files across the table. She examined each photograph, each note, each map with obsessive focus. Her eyes landed on a receipt tucked into one of Elena's notebooks, a receipt from a high-end jewelry store dated 2 weeks before her death. Scribbled in the margins were the words, "Meeting confirmed. 2 p.m. Izzy's instincts buzzed. The receipt didn't seem significant at first glance, but why would Elena keep it unless it was tied to her investigation? She jotted down the name of the store and decided to pay them a visit first thing in the morning. The next day, Izzy stood outside the jewelry store, its polished windows gleaming in the early sunlight. Inside, the air smelled of leather and perfume, and the staff moved with the practiced grace of people accustomed to catering to the wealthy. Izzy approached the counter, flashing her badge at the nervous sales associate. "I'm Detective Diaz. I need to ask you about a purchase made here 2 weeks ago," she said, sliding the receipt across the counter. "This customer, Elena Vargas. Do you remember her?" The associate nodded hesitantly. "Yes, I remember her. She came in asking about a custom order. She seemed anxious. Like she was in a hurry." "What was the custom order?" Izzy asked. The associate hesitated, then retrieved a record book from beneath the counter. It was a necklace. A replica of an antique piece she brought with her. She said it was urgent, and she paid extra for us to rush the job. She picked it up the same day. Izzy's pulse quickened. "Do you have a description of the original piece she wanted replicated?" The associate flipped through the book and turned it toward Izzy. Her breath caught in her throat. The sketch was unmistakable. It was Eleanor Graves' missing necklace, the one that had vanished from the yacht. Izzy's mind raced as she pieced it together. Elena had somehow gotten her hands on Eleanor's necklace, or a replica of it. But why? Was the necklace the key to the entire conspiracy? And if so, how had it ended up on the yacht the night of Eleanor's murder? She thanked the associate and left the store, her thoughts spinning. Back at the precinct, Keller called with an update. "I've got something for you," he said. "The chatter about the Queen is real. Her name hasn't surfaced yet, but she's been making moves behind the scenes. Word is, she's not just part of the Costello family, she's trying to take over." "Take over?" Izzy repeated, her grip tightening on her phone. "You're saying there's a power struggle within the family?" "Exactly," Keller confirmed. "Vincent might be loyal to her, but not everyone else is. There's tension brewing, and your friend Elena might have gotten caught in the crossfire." Izzy's thoughts turned to the replica necklace. If the Queen was trying to solidify her power, the necklace might have been a key piece in her plan. But what was its significance? Why would Elena risk everything to have it replicated? The answer came later that night, as Izzy reviewed a new batch of files Keller had sent over. Among them was a photograph of a woman at a high-profile charity gala. She was wearing the original necklace, Eleanor Graves' necklace. But the photograph wasn't of Eleanor. It was of Bianca Costello, Vincent's sister. Izzy's heart raced as the pieces began to fall into place. Bianca wasn't just Vincent's sister, she was the queen. She had orchestrated Eleanor's murder to recover the necklace, using Vincent as her enforcer. But Elena had gotten too close, uncovering the truth and threatening to expose Bianca's involvement. That's why she'd been killed. The next step was clear: Izzy needed to confront Bianca. But this wasn't something she could do alone. She called Keller, laying out her theory. "It's Bianca," she said. "She's the queen. She's behind everything." There was a pause on the line. "That's a dangerous accusation, Diaz," Keller said. "If you're right, this could bring down the entire Costello operation. But if you're wrong—" "I'm not wrong," Izzy interrupted. "I need your help to bring her in. We can't let her slip away." Keller sighed. "All right. But we're going to need a solid plan. If we go after her, she's going to fight back." Izzy nodded, determination hardening her resolve. "Then we make sure she doesn't see us coming." The plan was set in motion. Keller pulled strings to get a warrant, while Izzy gathered her team and prepared for the takedown. Bianca was hosting a private event at one of the Costello's properties, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city. It was the perfect opportunity to catch her off guard. The night of the operation, Izzy stood outside the estate, her heart pounding as she waited for the signal. Keller's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Teams in position. On your go, Diaz." Izzy took a deep breath, then gave the order. "Move in." The SWAT team stormed the estate, breaking through the gates and sweeping through the property with precision. Izzy followed close behind, her weapon drawn as she navigated the opulent halls. She found Bianca in the grand dining room, surrounded by bodyguards. The Queen of Hearts sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as if she'd been expecting them. "Detective Diaz," Bianca said, her voice smooth and unbothered. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Izzy stepped forward, her gun trained on Bianca. "You're under arrest for the murders of Eleanor Graves and Elena Vargas." Bianca's lips curved into a faint smile. "Murder? Such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as necessary business." Izzy's jaw tightened. "This business ends now." Bianca's expression darkened, but before she could respond, the SWAT team moved in, disarming her guards and placing her in handcuffs. As she was led away, Bianca turned to Izzy, her eyes cold and unyielding. "You think this is over?" she said. "This is just the beginning." Izzy didn't respond. She watched as Bianca was taken away, a sense of relief washing over her. The queen had fallen, but the game wasn't over. The Costello family was still a force to be reckoned with, and Izzy knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. But for now, justice had been served. And that was enough. Izzy stood outside the estate as the last of the SWAT vehicles pulled away, their lights cutting through the dark night like piercing beacons of justice. The tension in her shoulders lessened slightly, but the weight of what lay ahead didn't disappear. Bianca Costello might have been taken into custody, but she wasn't wrong when she said this was just the beginning. The Costello family, fractured as they might be, wouldn't let this blow go unanswered. And Izzy knew she had painted a target on her back. Keller approached her, his expression a mixture of relief and caution. "You did good tonight, Diaz," he said, his voice low and steady. "But don't think for a second this war is over. Bianca's arrest is going to send shockwaves through their whole operation. You've rattled the hornet's nest." Izzy turned to face him, her jaw tight. "Let them come," she replied, her voice resolute. "We'll be ready. We've got their queen. The rest of the board will fall." Keller gave her a long look, then nodded. "Just watch your back. The Costellos don't play by anyone's rules. If they can't hit you through the system, they'll come at you from the shadows." Izzy didn't need the reminder, but she appreciated the concern. I'll be careful, she said, though she wasn't sure how much caution would help when dealing with a family as deeply rooted in the city's underbelly as the Costellos. The ride back to the precinct was quiet, the adrenaline of the raid beginning to fade. Izzy's mind was already moving to the next steps. Bianca's arrest was a victory, but it was only one piece in a much larger puzzle. There were still loose threads. Vincent Costello, the enforcer who had carried out Bianca's orders, was still out there. And while Bianca had been the mastermind, Vincent was the sword. He was dangerous, and Izzy doubted he would go down as easily as his sister. When Izzy arrived at the precinct, the atmosphere was electric. News of Bianca's arrest had already spread, and her team buzzed with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. Izzy ignored the stares and murmurs as she made her way to her desk. She sat down, pulling out her notes from the case and spreading them across the table. There was still so much to uncover. The Queen was in custody, but what about the King? The Costellos didn't operate without a hierarchy, and Bianca's rise to power had likely been supported, or at least tolerated, by someone higher up. Who was pulling the strings behind the scenes? And how far did their influence reach? Izzy's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the edge of her desk. She looked up to see Detective Ramirez, one of her closest allies in the department. He held out a cup of coffee, his expression serious. "Figured you could use this," he said. She took the cup with a nod of thanks. "What's the word on Bianca?" she asked. "She's being processed," Ramirez said, lowering his voice. "But she's not talking. She lawyered up the second she was brought in. High-powered attorney, too. The kind you don't see unless you've got serious money and connections." Izzy wasn't surprised. Bianca wouldn't go down without a fight, and she had the resources to drag this out for as long as possible. "What about the rest of the family?" she asked. "Any movement?" Ramirez hesitated. "That's the thing. There's been nothing. No retaliation, no sudden disappearances. It's quiet. Too quiet." Izzy's brow furrowed. The Costellos weren't the type to sit idle, especially after a blow like this. The silence was unnerving. "They're planning something," she said. "They have to be. Keep an eye on their known associates. I want to know the second anyone makes a move." Ramirez nodded and left, leaving Izzy alone with her thoughts once again. She sipped her coffee, the bitterness grounding her as she stared at the evidence in front of her. The Queen was in check, but the game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Hours passed as Izzy pored over the files, trying to anticipate the Costellos' next move. The precinct grew quieter as the night wore on, the hum of activity dwindling to a faint murmur. Izzy was about to call it a night when her phone buzzed on the desk. She picked it up, her pulse quickening when she saw the caller ID, Keller. "Diaz," she answered. "We've got a problem," Keller said, his voice tense. "Vincent's gone dark. We've been monitoring his known locations, but he's disappeared. No sightings, no chatter. It's like he vanished." Izzy's grip on the phone tightened. "That's not possible. He's too much of a player to just disappear. He's planning something." "That's what I'm afraid of," Keller said. "And there's more. One of my sources just tipped me off. There's a meeting happening tomorrow night. Big players from all over the city. Word is, they're gathering to decide the Costellos' next move." "Where?" Izzy asked, already grabbing her notepad. "An abandoned hotel on the east side," Keller said. "The place has been off the grid for years, but it's the perfect spot for something like this. Remote, hard to surveil." Izzy's mind raced. This could be their chance to take down not just Vincent, but the entire network of criminals aligned with the Costellos. But it would be dangerous. If the meeting was as big as Keller's source claimed, it would be heavily guarded. And if Vincent was there, he wouldn't go quietly. "I'll be there," Izzy said. "But I'll need backup." "I'll pull some strings," Keller said. "But be careful, Diaz. This isn't just another raid. These people don't play by the rules." "I know," Izzy said. "I'll be ready." The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Izzy coordinated with Keller and her team, mapping out the layout of the hotel and planning their approach. They couldn't afford any mistakes. By the time night fell, the tension was palpable. Izzy stood outside the hotel, her team assembled around her. Keller was by her side, his usual bravado replaced by a grim determination. "Remember," he said, addressing the group, "this is a high-risk operation. These people are armed, and they won't hesitate to use force. Stay sharp, stay focused, and we'll get through this." Izzy nodded, her hand resting on the holster at her hip. "Let's move." The team entered the hotel in silence, their footsteps muffled by the worn carpet. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of mildew. They moved cautiously, clearing each room as they made their way to the main hall where the meeting was supposed to take place. When they reached the hall, the scene before them was both chaotic and organized. Dozens of people filled the room, their voices a low murmur as they discussed strategies, alliances, and revenge. At the center of it all was Vincent Costello, his presence commanding despite his calm demeanor. Izzy's heart pounded as she signaled for her team to fan out. They moved into position, surrounding the hall before making their presence known. "Vincent Costello," Izzy called out, her voice echoing through the room. "This is the police. You're under arrest." The room erupted into chaos. Some of the attendees bolted for the exits, while others drew weapons, prepared to fight. Vincent stood his ground, his eyes locking onto Izzy with a cold, predatory gaze. "You've made a mistake coming here, detective," he said, his voice calm but laced with menace. "The only mistake was thinking you could get away with this," Izzy shot back. The standoff was brief but intense. Gunfire erupted as Vincent's men tried to fight their way out, but Izzy's team held their ground. In the end, Vincent was cornered, his calm facade cracking as he realized there was no escape. As he was led away in handcuffs, Vincent turned to Izzy, a cruel smile on his face. "You think this is over?" he said, echoing his sister's words. "You've just started a war you can't win." Izzy didn't respond. She watched as Vincent was taken away, her resolve hardening. The Costellos might have been dealt a major blow, but she knew the fight was far from over. This war wasn't about winning or losing, it was about justice. And Izzy was prepared to see it through, no matter the cost. The precinct was unusually quiet the next morning, but the tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. Vincent Costello had been processed and was now sitting in an interrogation room under heavy guard. Izzy stood outside the one-way glass, studying him. He sat there, calm and composed, his hands cuffed in front of him, his icy gaze fixed on the table. Vincent didn't look like a man who had just been dragged out of a criminal conclave. He looked like he was waiting for a business meeting. Keller appeared at her side, holding a cup of coffee. "You're going to need this," he said, handing it to her. "He's not going to crack easily." Izzy took the cup but didn't drink. Her eyes never left Vincent. "He doesn't need to crack. I just need him to slip." Keller raised an eyebrow. "You think he's going to give us anything useful?" "Everyone has a weak spot," Izzy said, her voice steady. "Even Vincent Costello." Keller leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "What's the play here? You go in, play the good cop, bad cop routine? He's dealt with this 100 times. You need to hit him where it hurts." Izzy turned to Keller, her eyes sharp. "I already know where to hit him. He's loyal to Bianca. She's the only person he listens to. If we make him think she's cooperating, he'll start unraveling." Keller smirked. "That's risky. If he calls your bluff." "He won't," Izzy interrupted. "He doesn't trust anyone outside the family. If he thinks Bianca's turned on him, it'll shake him." Keller nodded, his respect for Izzy's instincts evident. "All right. Let's see how this plays out." Izzy stepped into the interrogation room, her confidence masking the exhaustion that clung to her after the sleepless night. She set a folder on the table and took a seat across from Vincent, meeting his gaze head-on. His expression didn't waver, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps. "Vincent," she began, her tone calm but firm. "We've been chasing you for a long time. You've covered your tracks well, I'll give you that. But last night? That was a sloppy mistake." Vincent leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Sloppy? I'd say it was more of a calculated risk." "Call it whatever you want," Izzy said, opening the folder to reveal photographs of the meeting, the weapons, and the attendees who had been arrested. "The fact is, we have enough to bring you and your associates down. Attempted murder, illegal arms deals, conspiracy. You're looking at decades behind bars." Vincent chuckled, the sound low and unsettling. "You think this is enough? You think locking me up changes anything? The family will keep running. You can't stop what we've built." Izzy leaned forward, her voice dropping. "You're right. Taking you off the streets doesn't dismantle the Costellos. But you know who does? Bianca." For the first time, Vincent's expression shifted. It was subtle, a tightening of his jaw, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but Izzy caught it. "She's already talking, Vincent," Izzy continued, her voice steady and deliberate. "She knows the game is over. She's cutting a deal to protect herself. And you? You're just another pawn she's willing to sacrifice." Vincent's smile faltered, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "You're lying." "Am I?" Izzy pushed the folder toward him, showing a fabricated report of Bianca's alleged cooperation. It was a gamble, but one she'd prepared meticulously. The document looked official enough to cause doubt, and that was all she needed. Vincent's composure cracked further. He stared at the report, his mind racing. Izzy pressed on. "Think about it. Why wouldn't she? She's looking at life in prison, and she knows the only way out is to give us you. She's protecting herself, Vincent. That's what this family does, right? Survival first." The room was silent for a long moment. Vincent's fingers drummed against the table, his mask of indifference slipping. He was weighing his options, trying to decide whether to call her bluff or take the bait. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. "You think you're smart, don't you, detective? You think you've got it all figured out. But you don't know the first thing about my family." "Enlighten me," Izzy said, her tone calm but challenging. Vincent's eyes narrowed. "Bianca's not the only one with power in this city. You think I'm just some thug, some enforcer? I've been running operations while you've been chasing shadows. You take me down, and someone else steps up. That's how it works. The Costellos don't fall. Not for you, not for anyone." Izzy leaned back, her expression unreadable. "Maybe. Or maybe you're just another cog in the machine, disposable when the time comes. Bianca seems to think so." Vincent's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Izzy could see the wheels turning in his mind, the doubt creeping in. It was enough for now. She stood, gathering the folder. "You think about that, Vincent. We'll talk again soon." As she left the room, Keller was waiting for her. "Well?" he asked. "He's cracking," Izzy said. "Not enough to give us what we need yet, but he's doubting himself. We just have to keep the pressure on." Keller nodded. "What's next?" "Next, we find out if Bianca really is willing to talk," Izzy said. "She's the key to all of this. If we can flip her, we can dismantle the entire operation." Keller's expression darkened. "That's a big if. You know how these people work. Loyalty to the family runs deep." Izzy's gaze hardened. "Then we make her see that loyalty won't save her." "Not this time." The rest of the day was spent preparing for Bianca's interrogation. Izzy reviewed every piece of evidence they had, every angle they could exploit. Bianca was smart, ruthless, and calculating, but Izzy was determined to outmaneuver her. When the time came, Izzy entered the interrogation room with a renewed sense of purpose. Bianca sat across from her, her posture regal despite the handcuffs. She looked up as Izzy entered, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Detective Diaz," Bianca said, her voice smooth and unbothered. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Izzy sat down, placing a thick file on the table. "Bianca," she said, her tone calm but firm. "We both know you're too smart to let Vincent take the fall for you. He's a liability, and you know it. He's already starting to crack." Bianca's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "Vincent is loyal. He won't betray the family." "Loyalty only goes so far," Izzy said, opening the file to reveal fabricated statements suggesting Vincent was cooperating. "He's looking out for himself. Just like you should be." Bianca's expression remained composed, but Izzy could see the faintest flicker of doubt. It was a small opening, but it was enough. Izzy leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Help us, Bianca. Give us what we need, and we can protect you. You don't want to go down for this. Not when you have a way out." For the first time, Bianca hesitated. It was a brief pause, a crack in her armor, but it was enough to give Izzy hope. The game wasn't over yet, and she was determined to win. Bianca's hesitation was brief, but Izzy caught it, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly, her fingers twitching against the cool steel of the handcuffs. It was the smallest crack in the facade, but Izzy knew that with enough pressure, even the strongest walls could crumble. She leaned in, her voice calm but relentless. "You think Vincent's going to stay silent out of loyalty?" Izzy asked, her gaze fixed on Bianca. "You don't know him as well as you think. He's already doubting you, Bianca. He thinks you're the one who's turned on him. You let him carry out your orders, take the heat, and now he's the one sitting in that cell while you're in here weighing your options. How long do you think he'll stay loyal before he starts talking to save himself?" Bianca tilted her head, her lips curving into a faint, almost pitying smile. "You're good, detective. I'll give you that. But you don't understand how this family works. Loyalty isn't a choice for us, it's a legacy. Vincent knows that. He'll never betray me." Izzy didn't flinch. "Legacy? Is that what you tell yourself? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like survival is your real legacy. And Vincent's survival instinct is kicking in. He's already questioning your loyalty, Bianca. He thinks you're cutting a deal to save yourself." Bianca's smile faltered for the briefest moment, but she recovered quickly. "You're bluffing." Izzy leaned back, folding her arms. "Am I?" She let the silence hang between them for a moment, then slid a photo across the table. It was a still shot from the surveillance footage at the abandoned hotel, showing Vincent in the middle of the meeting. The image was grainy, but his expression was clear, confident, in control, and utterly unaware of what was coming. Izzy tapped the photo. "This is what he looked like before we stormed in," she said. Then she slid another photograph, a shot of Vincent being led away in handcuffs. His face was a mask of fury, his composure shattered. "This is what he looked like after. You tell me, Bianca. Does this look like a man who's going to sit quietly and take the fall for you?" Bianca's eyes flicked to the photos, her expression unreadable. Izzy could see the wheels turning in her mind, the calculations being made. This was a woman used to being in control, but now the pieces on the board were shifting in ways she hadn't anticipated. Izzy pressed on. "You're smart, Bianca. Smarter than Vincent, smarter than anyone else in your family. That's why you're in the position you're in. But that also means you know how this ends if you don't cooperate. The Costellos aren't invincible. We've already taken down your operation at the hotel. We have enough evidence to put you and Vincent away for decades. But you still have a chance to come out of this with something." Bianca finally met Izzy's gaze, her eyes cold and calculating. "And what exactly are you offering, detective? Because I'm not interested in fairy tales." Izzy didn't blink. "I'm offering you a deal. You give us the names of everyone involved in your operations, your suppliers, your buyers, your enforcers, we dismantle the entire network. In return, we'll work with the DA to reduce your sentence." You'll still serve time, but it won't be life. You'll have a chance to start over. Bianca laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. Start over? Do you have any idea what happens to people like me in prison? I'm better off taking my chances with the family. Izzy's gaze hardened. You think the family's going to protect you? They won't. Not when they realize you're too much of a liability. You think Vincent's the only one doubting you? The moment you were arrested, every single person in your network started asking themselves the same question: how long until Bianca talks? How long until she gives them up to save herself? You know how this works, Bianca. The second they think you're a risk, you're done. The only protection you have is sitting right here, across this table. The room fell silent again, the air thick with tension. Bianca's smile had disappeared, replaced by a guarded expression. She was weighing her options, and Izzy could see the conflict in her eyes. It wasn't just about loyalty, it was about survival. Bianca had spent her entire life playing the game, staying one step ahead of everyone else. But now, for the first time, she was cornered. Finally, Bianca let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly. You're good, detective, she said quietly. Better than I expected. But if I give you what you want, I want guarantees. Real guarantees. None of this "we'll talk to the DA" nonsense. I want witness protection. A new identity. A clean slate. Izzy nodded, her expression steady. You give us everything, every name, every location, every operation, and I'll personally make sure the DA agrees to your terms. But if you hold back, even for a second, the deal's off. Bianca studied her for a long moment, then finally leaned back in her chair. Fine, she said. But if I go down, I'm taking everyone with me. Including Vincent. Izzy's chest tightened, but she didn't let it show. Good. Let's start with the real structure of your organization. Who's above you? Bianca's lips curled into a sharp smile. Above me? Oh, detective, you really think I'm the top of the chain? There's always someone higher, someone pulling the strings. And you're not ready for who that is. Izzy's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. Bianca's words sent a ripple of unease through her. She had suspected there might be more to the Costello family than what they'd uncovered so far, but hearing it confirmed was another matter entirely. Then start talking, Izzy said, her voice firm. I want names. Bianca's smile widened. All right, detective. But you'd better brace yourself. Because when this is over, you'll realize you've only just scratched the surface. For the next several hours, Bianca began unraveling the intricate web of the Costello empire. She spoke of shell companies, offshore accounts, and alliances with other criminal organizations that stretched far beyond the city. It was overwhelming, but Izzy scribbled down every detail, her resolve hardening with each revelation. By the time the interrogation was over, Izzy had a list of names and locations that would take months, maybe even years, to fully investigate. But one name stood out among the rest, a name that made Izzy's blood run cold: Dominic Santoro. Who is he? Izzy asked, her pen hovering above her notepad. Bianca's smile turned icy. He's the one you should really be afraid of. The Costellos may run the streets, but Dominic Santoro? He runs the world behind them. If you want to take him down, detective, you'll need more than a badge. You'll need an army. Izzy's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She stood, gathering her notes and leaving the room without another word. As she stepped into the hallway, Keller was waiting for her, his expression grim. Well, he asked. Izzy handed him the notepad. We've got enough to take down the Costellos. But there's someone bigger. Someone pulling the strings. Keller scanned the notes, his eyes widening when he reached Santoro's name. You're kidding me, he muttered. Santoro? That guy's untouchable. He's been on the FBI's radar for years, but no one's been able to get close. Izzy's gaze hardened. Then it's time someone did. Keller stared at Izzy for a long moment, his brow furrowing as he processed her words. You realize what you're saying, right? He said, his voice low and cautious. Dominic Santoro isn't just another crime boss. He's untouchable for a reason. The man has connections everywhere, politicians, law enforcement, even federal agencies. You go after him, and you're not just playing with fire. You're walking into an inferno. Izzy clenched her jaw, her hands tightening around the file she held. I don't care how powerful he is, she said. If he's the one pulling the strings, if he's the reason people like Bianca and Vincent are running this city into the ground, then he needs to be stopped. Keller sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're relentless, Diaz. I admire that about you. But this isn't like taking down a local crime family. Santoro operates on a global scale. He's not going to fall because you flash a badge and a warrant. You'll need solid evidence, airtight witnesses, and a team that's willing to risk everything. Izzy met his gaze, her determination unwavering. Then we build that case. We use everything Bianca gave us, follow every lead, uncover every connection. We've already taken down the Costello's leadership. That's going to send ripples through their entire network. Santoro won't be able to hide forever. Keller shook his head, though there was a glimmer of reluctant respect in his eyes. You're not going to let this go, are you? No, Izzy said simply. I'm not. He exhaled, his shoulders slumping slightly. Fine. But you'd better know what you're getting yourself into. If we go after Santoro, we're going to need more than just Bianca's cooperation. We'll need someone inside his operation. Someone who can give us real-time intel. Izzy considered this, her mind racing. Bianca had provided a treasure trove of information, but Keller was right, Santoro was too well insulated to be taken down with second-hand intel. They needed someone who could infiltrate his organization, someone who could get close to him without raising suspicion. Her thoughts drifted to Vincent Costello. He was still sitting in his cell, stewing over Bianca's supposed betrayal. If anyone had the connections and insight to get close to Santoro, it was him. But convincing Vincent to cooperate would be a monumental task. Keller, Izzy said, her voice steady. What if we flipped Vincent? Keller blinked, clearly caught off guard. You want to flip Vincent Costello? The guy who's made a career out of being loyal to the family? That's a long shot, Diaz. Even for you. Think about it, Izzy said, her tone insistent. Vincent's angry. He feels betrayed by Bianca, whether it's true or not. If we play on that anger, make him believe the family has abandoned him, we might be able to turn him. And if we can turn him, we'll have someone with direct access to Santoro. Keller frowned, clearly skeptical. And if he's just playing along? If he uses this as an opportunity to feed us false intel or sabotage the investigation? Then we stay one step ahead of him, Izzy said. We control the narrative, set the terms. If he wants to avoid spending the rest of his life in prison, he'll have to cooperate. He won't have any other choice. Keller steadied her for a moment, then sighed. All right. Let's give it a shot. But don't say I didn't warn you if this blows up in our faces. Izzy nodded, already formulating her approach. It won't, she said. Vincent's smart, but he's also prideful. If we hit the right nerve, he'll bend. The next day, Izzy walked into the interrogation room where Vincent sat, his cuffs clinking faintly as he adjusted his posture. His expression was colder now, his eyes sharper. He had time to think, and it was clear he was gearing up for a fight. Detective Diaz, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Back so soon? I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me. Izzy ignored his jab, sitting across from him and placing a slim file on the table. She didn't open it, didn't even glance at it. Instead, she fixed her gaze on him, letting the silence stretch. Vincent cocked an eyebrow, his smirk faltering slightly. What? No grand speeches today? No dramatic evidence to shove in my face? You know what I think, Vincent? Izzy said finally, her voice calm, almost conversational. I think you're smarter than you let on. Smarter than Bianca, even. She might have been running the show, but you were the one doing the heavy lifting. The one making it all work. Vincent's smirk returned, though there was a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Flattery, detective? I didn't think you had it in you. It's not flattery, Izzy said. It's the truth. And that's why I think you're going to want to hear what I have to say. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his expression guarded. All right. I'm listening. Izzy placed her hands flat on the table, her tone steady. Bianca's done. She's cooperating with us, giving us everything we need to dismantle the Costello family. But here's the thing, once the dust settles, we're going after the person who's really in charge. Dominic Santoro. At the mention of Santoro's name, Vincent's expression hardened. Izzy pressed on. You know as well as I do that Santoro doesn't care about you. You're a tool to him, just like Bianca was. And when tools outlive their usefulness, he throws them away. That's what's going to happen to you if you stay loyal to him. Vincent's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Izzy leaned in, her voice dropping slightly. I'm offering you a way out, she said. You help us take down Santoro, and we'll work with the DA to reduce your sentence. You'll still do time, but it won't be life. And when it's all over, you'll have a chance to start fresh. A real chance. Vincent's eyes narrowed, his mind clearly racing. And what makes you think I'd betray Santoro? He's the one who built everything the Costellos have. Without him, we're nothing. Izzy's gaze didn't waver. Without him, you're free. Free from the family, free from the legacy, free from being someone else's pawn. Think about it, Vincent. You're smart enough to see where this is going. Santoro doesn't lose sleep over people like you. But you? You have a chance to turn this around. To come out of this with something. The silence that followed was heavy, fraught with tension. Vincent's gaze dropped to the table, his fingers drumming lightly against the surface. Finally, he looked up, his expression unreadable. I'll think about it, he said. Izzy nodded, standing and gathering the file. Good. But don't take too long. Santoro doesn't give second chances, and neither do I. As she left the room, Keller was waiting for her in the hallway. Well, he asked. He's thinking about it, Izzy said. It's not a yes, but it's not a no. Keller frowned. Let's hope it's enough. Because if Santoro gets wind of this, he's not just going to come after Vincent. He's coming after all of us. Izzy kept her pace measured as she walked down the precinct hallway, her mind racing despite the calm exterior she projected. Vincent's hesitation was a crack in the foundation, but it wasn't enough. He wasn't fully on board yet, and time wasn't on their side. Dominic Santoro was a ghost, someone who operated in the shadows, insulated by layers of loyal subordinates and corrupt alliances. If Vincent didn't flip soon, the opportunity to make a move against Santoro could vanish entirely. Keller caught up with her, his steps falling in line with hers. Diaz, I know you're hoping Vincent's going to come around, but we need a contingency plan. If he doesn't flip, we're going to need another way in. Izzy stopped, turning to face him. You think I don't know that, she said, her voice low but firm. I'm already working on it. But right now, Vincent's our best shot. If we push too hard, he'll shut down completely. I need him to believe this is his only way out. Keller steadied her, his expression unreadable. You're playing a dangerous game, Izzy. Santoro isn't just going to sit back and wait for us to build a case. He's going to start cleaning house the second he gets a whiff of trouble. That means witnesses, evidence, anyone who could tie him to the Costellos, it all disappears. I know, Izzy said, her voice quieter now. But if we don't take this shot, we'll never get another one. Santoro's been untouchable for years. This is the closest anyone's ever gotten to him. Keller exhaled, his shoulders sagging slightly. All right. But if you're going to keep playing this angle with Vincent, I need you to promise me something. What's that? Izzy asked. That you'll keep yourself in check, Keller said. You're good at getting people to talk, but Vincent's not like the others you've dealt with. He's calculating, and he knows how to manipulate people. Don't let him turn the tables on you. Izzy nodded, appreciating the concern but unwilling to let it distract her. I'll be careful, she said. But I'm not backing down from this. 2 days passed with no word from Vincent. Izzy tried to focus on other parts of the case, poring over Bianca's notes and cross-referencing names and locations with what they already knew about the Costello organization. But the silence from Vincent gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was biding his time, weighing his options. Or worse, playing her. It wasn't until the 3rd day that she got a call from one of the officers on duty. Detective Diaz, we've got Vincent Costello asking to speak with you. Says it's urgent. Izzy felt a knot form in her stomach. She grabbed her coat and headed straight for the holding area, her mind racing with possibilities. When she entered the small meeting room where Vincent was waiting, she found him leaning back in his chair, his cuffs resting on the table. He looked tired, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Detective Diaz, he said, his tone almost casual. I've been thinking about your offer. Izzy sat down across from him, keeping her expression neutral. And I've decided, Vincent said, leaning forward slightly. I'll help you take down Santoro. But I have conditions. Izzy raised an eyebrow. You're not exactly in a position to negotiate, Vincent. Maybe not, he said, shrugging. But without me, you're flying blind. You don't know how Santoro operates, who his lieutenants are, or where to find him. You need me. And if I'm going to stick my neck out for you, I need to know I'll still have one when this is over. Izzy folded her arms, steadying him. What are your conditions? First, Vincent said, his tone serious now, I want full immunity for anything tied to the Costello family. Anything I did under Bianca's orders is off the table. That's not going to happen, Izzy said immediately. The DA isn't going to give you a free pass for everything you've done. Then we're done here, Vincent said, leaning back again. Good luck finding Santoro without me. Izzy's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. Vincent, you're already facing life in prison. If you think Santoro or anyone else in your family is going to bail you out, you're delusional. The best you're going to get is a reduced sentence, and that's only if you give us something solid. Vincent was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned forward again, his voice lower now. Fine. No full immunity. But I want protection. Witness protection. A new identity, a clean slate, just like you offered Bianca. Izzy hesitated. This was the opening she needed, but agreeing to his demand would mean putting resources on the line without knowing if he'd truly cooperate. Still, she couldn't let the opportunity slip away. I'll talk to the DA, she said. But you'll need to give us something first. A show of good faith. Vincent smirked, as though he'd expected this. Fair enough, he said. You want a name? I'll give you one. Someone in Santoro's inner circle. Someone who can lead you right to him. Izzy grabbed her notepad, her pen poised. I'm listening. Vincent leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. Marco DeLuca. He's Santoro's fixer. Handles all the dirty work, bribes, blackmail, cleanup jobs. If you want to get to Santoro, you start with him. Izzy's pen froze for a moment before she jotted down the name. DeLuca was a name she'd heard before, whispered in connection with high-profile scandals and mysterious disappearances. But no one had ever been able to pin anything on him. Where can we find him? Izzy asked. Vincent's smirk returned. That's the tricky part. Marco doesn't stay in one place for long. But if you're serious about finding him, there's a poker game happening tomorrow night at the Emerald Club. High stakes, invitation only. Marco's a regular. Izzy's mind raced as she processed the information. If DeLuca really was attending the game, it could be their chance to bring him in. But it wouldn't be easy. The Emerald Club was known for its tight security and its clientele's preference for discretion. "All right," she said finally. "We'll check it out. But if this turns out to be a dead end, the deal's off." "It won't be," Vincent said, his confidence unwavering. "Marco's your way in. You just need to make sure you don't scare him off before you get what you need." Back in her office, Izzy filled Keller in on the new lead. He raised an eyebrow at Vincent's cooperation but didn't voice any objections. "The Emerald Club, huh?" Keller said, crossing his arms. "That place is a fortress. You're not going to just stroll in and start asking questions." "I know," Izzy said. "We'll need to do this quietly. No badges, no SWAT teams. We go undercover, gain Marco's trust, and get him to talk." Keller sighed. "Undercover ops aren't exactly my style, but I'll get you what you need. Just promise me you'll be careful. If Marco's as connected as Vincent says, he'll smell a cop a mile away." Izzy nodded, already planning her approach. "I'll handle it. We've come this far, Keller. I'm not letting this slip through our fingers." As the night of the poker game approached, Izzy prepared for what she knew would be one of the riskiest moves of her career. The stakes were higher than ever, and one wrong step could cost her everything. But if Marco DeLuca was the key to unraveling Dominic Santoro's empire, she was willing to take the risk. The Emerald Club loomed ahead, a beacon of exclusivity and power nestled in the heart of the city's wealthiest district. Its grand, Art Deco facade was lit by soft golden lights, and the sound of muffled jazz filtered out into the night. Izzy adjusted her dress, a sleek black number that hugged her frame and allowed her to blend seamlessly with the clientele. Her hair was styled in loose waves, and a pair of diamond earrings sparkled under the soft glow of the streetlights. Everything about her screamed wealth and sophistication, exactly the image she needed to project tonight. Keller's voice buzzed in her earpiece, breaking her concentration. "Are you sure about this, Diaz? This isn't just any poker game. These people don't take kindly to strangers, especially ones who ask too many questions." Izzy pressed a hand to her ear, pretending to adjust an earring as she spoke quietly. "Relax, Keller. I've got this. Just keep the line open in case things go sideways." "I'll be here," Keller replied. "But remember, if Marco DeLuca even suspects you're a cop, this could get ugly fast." Izzy took a steadying breath and walked toward the entrance, her heels clicking against the pavement. A uniformed doorman greeted her, his sharp eyes scanning her from head to toe. "Good evening," he said politely. "Invitation, please." Izzy reached into her clutch and pulled out a sleek black card embossed with gold lettering. It wasn't hers, of course. Keller had managed to secure it through one of his contacts. The doorman examined it briefly, then nodded and stepped aside, opening the heavy door for her. "Enjoy your evening," he said. The interior of the club was even more opulent than Izzy had anticipated. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the polished marble floors. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and aged whiskey. Wealthy men and women mingled in clusters, their laughter and conversation blending with the soft strains of live jazz coming from a small stage in the corner. Izzy moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her sharp eyes scanning the room for Marco DeLuca. She'd studied his file extensively, mid-40s, dark hair slicked back, a lean build, and an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He was a man who thrived on control, and if Vincent's intel was accurate, he wouldn't miss a game like this. As she approached the private poker room, a large man in a tailored suit stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His expression was neutral, but the way he crossed his arms sent a clear message: no one got past him without approval. "This is a private game," he said flatly. "Name?" Izzy smiled, exuding just the right mix of charm and authority. "Sofia Delgado," she said smoothly, using the alias Keller had arranged for her. "I believe Mr. DeLuca is expecting me." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical, but before he could press further, a voice called out from behind him. "It's all right, Tony. Let her in." Izzy's heart skipped a beat as Marco DeLuca himself stepped into view. He was exactly as she'd pictured, sharp suit, piercing eyes, and a demeanor that commanded attention. He gave her a once-over, his expression inscrutable. "You must be Ms. Delgado," he said, his voice smooth but laced with curiosity. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure." Izzy extended her hand, her smile never faltering. "Not yet, but I've heard a lot about you, Mr. DeLuca. I've been looking forward to this." His lips twitched into a faint smile as he shook her hand. "Well, I hope I live up to the reputation. Come, the game's about to start." He gestured for her to follow, and she did, her pulse quickening as she stepped into the private poker room. The space was smaller, more intimate, with a round table at its center surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. Several men were already seated, their faces a mixture of familiarity and suspicion as they sized her up. Marco pulled out a chair for her, a gesture that felt more like an evaluation than courtesy. "Please, have a seat." Izzy sat down, her movements deliberate and composed. A waiter appeared almost instantly, placing a glass of champagne in front of her. She took a sip, her eyes flicking around the table as she committed each face to memory. These weren't just players, they were part of Santoro's network. She was certain of it. The game began, and Izzy played cautiously at first, letting the others underestimate her. She wasn't here to win money, she was here to gather intel. Marco, however, was a formidable player. He watched her closely, his every move calculated, as if trying to peel back the layers of her persona. "So, Ms. Delgado," Marco said casually as he studied his cards. "What brings you to our little corner of the city? You don't strike me as a regular." Izzy smiled, taking her time to respond. "I'm not," she admitted. "But I've been looking to expand my interests. I heard this was the place to meet the right people." Marco raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "And what kind of interests would those be?" "The kind that are profitable," Izzy said, her tone light but purposeful. "Let's just say I have resources, and I'm always looking for opportunities to invest." Marco's lips curled into a faint smile. "I see. Well, you've come to the right place. But be careful, this city has a way of chewing people up and spitting them out." "I can handle myself," Izzy replied smoothly. "But I appreciate the warning." The conversation shifted as the game continued, but Izzy could feel Marco's eyes on her, studying her every move. She knew she had to tread carefully, one misstep, one inconsistency, and he'd see right through her. After several rounds, Marco leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You're an interesting woman, Ms. Delgado," he said. "I can't quite figure you out." Izzy met his gaze, her smile subtle but confident. "That's because I don't like being predictable, Mr. DeLuca." He chuckled, clearly intrigued. "Fair enough. Perhaps we should talk more, privately. I have a feeling we might be able to help each other." Izzy's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. This was the opening she'd been waiting for. "I'd like that," she said. Marco stood, gesturing for her to follow him. As they left the poker room, Izzy's mind raced. She was walking a razor's edge, but if she could gain Marco's trust, it would bring her one step closer to Santoro. In the back of her mind, Keller's voice echoed, "Be careful, Diaz." She only hoped she wasn't about to push her luck too far. Marco led Izzy down a narrow hallway lined with abstract paintings and soft, recessed lighting. The muted jazz from the main room faded behind them, replaced by the faint hum of air conditioning and the muffled sounds of the private poker room they'd just left. Izzy maintained her confident stride, but her senses were on high alert. Every step felt like a test, every glance from Marco a silent probe into her intentions. He stopped in front of a door at the end of the hallway and opened it, revealing a private lounge. The room was luxurious but understated, dark leather sofas, a mahogany bar stocked with high-end liquor, and a low coffee table littered with crystal ashtrays and unopened cigars. Marco gestured for her to enter first, and she did, her heels clicking softly against the polished wood floor. "Take a seat," Marco said, his voice measured but inviting. He moved to the bar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, neat. "You strike me as someone who appreciates the finer things." Izzy allowed herself a small smile as she sat down on the edge of one of the sofas. "You're not wrong." Marco handed her a glass and sat across from her, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching her over the rim. "So, Ms. Delgado, let's cut to the chase. You don't strike me as someone who just stumbles into a place like this. You're here for a reason. What is it you really want?" Izzy took a sip of the whiskey, letting the warmth spread through her before answering. "I told you, I'm looking for opportunities. But more than that, I'm looking for the right people. People who know how to get things done." Marco leaned back, his expression unreadable. "And what makes you think I'm one of those people?" "Call it a hunch," Izzy said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Word travels fast in certain circles. Your name came up more than once." Marco smirked, clearly pleased but still cautious. "Flattery will get you far, Ms. Delgado. But if you're looking for someone to get things done, you should know that kind of trust doesn't come cheap. Or quickly." "I wouldn't expect it to," Izzy said, her tone calm and measured. "But I'm willing to prove I'm serious. You tell me what you need, and I'll make it happen." Marco steadied her, his gaze piercing. For a moment, Izzy thought she might have pushed too hard, too fast. But then he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of approval. "There's a shipment coming in next week," Marco said, his voice low. "High value, high stakes. If you're as resourceful as you claim, you'll find a way to make sure it gets where it needs to go. No questions, no mistakes." Izzy's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. This was it, a chance to prove herself, to get deeper into Marco's operation. But it was also a risk. She had no idea what the shipment contained or who else might be involved. "I'll need the details," she said, keeping her voice steady. "You'll get them," Marco replied. "For now, just know that failure isn't an option. If you slip up, you won't get a second chance." Izzy nodded, as if the threat didn't faze her. "Understood." Marco stood, signaling that the meeting was over. "I'll be in touch," he said, opening the door. "And Ms. Delgado? Welcome to the big leagues." Izzy smiled faintly as she stood. "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." Once she was back in the safety of the precinct, Izzy pulled out her earpiece and slumped into her chair, letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Keller was standing nearby, his arms crossed and a deep frown etched into his face. "Well?" he asked. Izzy looked up at him, her expression grim. "He's testing me. There's a shipment coming in next week, and he wants me to oversee it." Keller's frown deepened. "Do you have any idea what's in that shipment?" "No," Izzy admitted. "But whatever it is, it's important enough for Marco to put me on the spot. If I can pull this off, I'll have his trust. And once I have his trust, I can get closer to Santoro." Keller shook his head, clearly uneasy. "This is getting out of hand, Diaz. You're in way over your head. If Marco even suspects you're a cop, he'll bury you before you can get a word out." "I know the risks," Izzy said firmly. "But we don't have a choice. If we're going to take down Santoro, we have to play this out." Keller sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine. But we're doing this my way. I'll get a team on standby to monitor the shipment. The second anything goes wrong, we're pulling you out." Izzy nodded, grateful for his support despite his reservations. "All right. Let's get to work." The week leading up to the shipment was a whirlwind of preparation. Izzy worked closely with Keller and the rest of her team, piecing together everything they could about Marco's operation. They identified potential drop points, scouted surveillance locations, and coordinated with other units to ensure the shipment could be intercepted without blowing Izzy's cover. When the night finally arrived, Izzy found herself in the passenger seat of a sleek black car, her nerves on edge as Marco drove them to the rendezvous point. He was silent, his focus on the road, but the tension in the car was palpable. They arrived at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, where a small group of men was already waiting. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline and rust, and the faint hum of distant machinery echoed through the night. Marco stepped out of the car, motioning for Izzy to follow. As they approached the group, one of the men, a burly figure with a shaved head and a scar running down his cheek, eyed Izzy suspiciously. "Who's this?" he asked, his tone gruff. "She's with me," Marco said curtly. "You got a problem with that?" The man grunted but said nothing, turning his attention to a large crate being unloaded from the back of a truck. Izzy's heart raced as she watched, every fiber of her being screaming to stay calm and blend in. "What's in the crate?" she asked casually, keeping her tone light. Marco shot her a sharp look. "You don't ask questions, Ms. Delgado. You just make sure it gets where it needs to go." Izzy nodded, biting back a response. She needed to play this carefully. For now, her priority was gathering as much information as possible without raising suspicion. As the men worked to secure the shipment, Marco pulled her aside. "This is your chance to prove yourself," he said, his voice low. "Don't mess it up." "I won't," Izzy replied, her voice steady despite the storm of nerves inside her. But as the night wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The men were too tense, too on edge. And when she caught a glimpse of the contents of the crate, rows of unmarked weapons, her stomach dropped. This wasn't just a test. It was a trap. And if she wasn't careful, it could cost her everything. Izzy's pulse quickened as she caught sight of the weapons inside the crate. The realization hit her like a fist to the gut. This wasn't just about gaining Marco's trust. This was a deliberate move, a setup designed to test her loyalty and possibly her identity. If she faltered or asked the wrong questions, she'd be exposed. She forced herself to stay composed, keeping her face neutral as she turned back to Marco. "Impressive load," she said, her voice steady. "I'm assuming the destination is as high profile as the cargo?" Marco's lips curled into a faint smirk, but his eyes remained cold. "You're sharp, Ms. Delgado." "That's good. But if you're going to work with me, you'll need to learn to keep your curiosity in check." Izzy nodded, masking her growing unease. "Understood. Where do you need me?" Marco gestured toward the truck. "You'll ride with the shipment. Make sure it gets to the drop point without any complications." Izzy's heart sank. Riding with the shipment meant being cut off from Keller and the backup team. She'd be completely alone, surrounded by Marco's men, with no way to signal for help if things went wrong. But she couldn't refuse, not without blowing her cover. "Got it," she said, climbing into the passenger seat of the truck. One of Marco's men, the scarred brute from earlier, slid in behind the wheel, his expression unreadable. The rest of the crew loaded into a separate vehicle, forming a small convoy as they pulled away from the warehouse. Izzy's mind raced as they drove through the darkened streets. She needed to figure out where they were headed, but asking too many questions would raise suspicion. Instead, she focused on memorizing landmarks and street signs, piecing together their route in her head. After what felt like an eternity, the convoy pulled into another warehouse, this one located near the docks. The air was thick with the smell of saltwater and oil, and the distant sound of waves lapping against the piers echoed through the night. The driver killed the engine and stepped out, motioning for Izzy to follow. She climbed down from the truck, her heels clicking against the cracked pavement as she surveyed the area. Several more men were waiting near the warehouse entrance, their faces shadowed under the dim light of a single overhead bulb. Marco emerged from one of the other vehicles, his expression unreadable as he approached her. "You've done well so far," he said. "But now comes the real test." Izzy frowned, her stomach tightening. "Test?" Marco gestured toward the warehouse. "Inside, you'll find the buyer. He's expecting the shipment, but he's also expecting assurances. I want you to handle the handoff." Izzy's blood ran cold. The handoff meant negotiating directly with the buyer, someone who was likely as dangerous and as suspicious as Marco. If she slipped up, even slightly, it could all be over. "Of course," she said, forcing a calm smile. "I assume you'll be close by if things go south?" Marco chuckled, the sound low and humorless. "Oh, I'll be watching. But don't worry, I have faith in you, Ms. Delgado." Izzy swallowed hard and stepped toward the warehouse, her heels echoing against the concrete. As she approached the entrance, she caught a glimpse of Keller's car parked several blocks away, hidden in the shadows. It was a small comfort to know he was nearby, even if he couldn't intervene. Inside the warehouse, the buyer waited near a stack of crates. He was a wiry man in a tailored suit, his sharp eyes narrowing as he spotted her. Two heavily armed guards flanked him, their hands resting on their weapons. "You're not who I was expecting," the buyer said, his voice cold and suspicious. Izzy smiled faintly, her heart pounding. "Consider me an upgrade." Marco wanted to make sure this deal went smoothly. The buyer's eyes flicked over her, clearly unconvinced. "And what makes you qualified to handle something like this?" Izzy stepped closer, keeping her movements measured. "Because I'm the one who makes problems disappear," she said, her voice low and confident. "And because Marco trusts me. Isn't that enough?" The buyer studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "We'll see. Let's take a look at the shipment." Izzy gestured for the guards to open the crate, her palms sweating as they pried it open to reveal the weapons inside. The buyer stepped forward, inspecting the contents with a critical eye. After a tense silence, he nodded again, this time with approval. "It's what I asked for," he said. "We'll take it." Izzy exhaled quietly, relief washing over her. But before she could respond, the faint sound of sirens reached her ears, growing louder by the second. Her stomach dropped. Keller and the team were moving in, and they were early. "What the hell is that?" the buyer snapped, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward her. Izzy's mind raced as she tried to come up with an explanation. "Must be a false alarm," she said quickly. "Stay calm. I'll handle it." But the buyer wasn't convinced. He signaled to his guards, who immediately drew their weapons. The room erupted into chaos as the sirens grew deafening, and the sound of vehicles screeching to a halt outside filled the air. Izzy ducked behind a stack of crates, her heart pounding as she reached for the concealed earpiece in her clutch. "Keller! What the hell are you doing?" "I'm still inside." Keller's voice crackled in her ear, strained and urgent. "The situation changed, Izzy. We got word that the buyer's crew was planning to double-cross Marco. We had to move in." "Damn it," Izzy muttered, peeking out from behind the crates. The buyer and his guards were scrambling to escape, while Marco's men were shouting orders from the entrance. Gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks echoing through the warehouse. Izzy knew she had to act fast. She couldn't let Marco think she'd betrayed him, but she also couldn't let the buyer escape with the shipment. She grabbed a heavy wrench from a nearby workbench and hurled it toward the buyer's guards, the clang of metal against concrete drawing their attention. As they turned toward the noise, Izzy darted out from her hiding spot, grabbing the buyer by the arm and shoving him toward Marco's men. "You wanted assurances?" she shouted over the chaos. "Here's your damn buyer." Marco's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene, but he quickly signaled for his men to secure the buyer. Izzy stepped back, her heart racing as Keller's team stormed the warehouse, their tactical gear gleaming under the harsh overhead lights. The chaos subsided as the buyer and his crew were subdued, their weapons confiscated. Marco approached Izzy, his expression unreadable. "You handled yourself well," he said finally. "Better than I expected." Izzy forced a faint smile. "Like I said, I'm good at making problems disappear." Marco chuckled, though there was a hint of suspicion in his eyes. "We'll see. For now, you've earned yourself another job." As he turned and walked away, Izzy exhaled, her legs trembling as the adrenaline began to wear off. She caught Keller's eye from across the room, his expression a mix of relief and frustration. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, Izzy had managed to keep her cover intact. And with every step deeper into Marco's operation, she was getting closer to the man who truly controlled it all, Dominic Santoro.